Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in the New River Valley of Virginia. And today we have a full moon in Aries. Of course, this comes about 6 months after we had a new moon in Aries. Um, I remember way back in my early astrology career in the mid 90s, learning this technique of tracking the new moon and then a full moon in the same sign 6 months later, and understanding how the seeds are planted at the new moon, and then there's a flowering or a culmination or a fruiting, if you will, at the full moon. And this is a really powerful technique to look at in your life. So you just basically look at whatever house Aries represents in your horoscope. For me, I'm Aquarius rising, so it's the third house. And I started my Substack back in March. I was interested in some things that I had to say, and then began to happen. I ended up in Spain for the summer, and I never did publish anything on there. And so just recently, I published an article on this full moon. So, you can kind of see the principle at work there. And I invite each of you to do the same thing. And I usually start there with a lot of my beginners because it's such a profound and useful tool to simply track the new moon and the full moons around. And I mean, you could do it for at least a year to get an idea of, okay, yeah, these are third house themes, but this is how third house themes show up in my life. You know, um, I happen to be a third house stellium, and so everything's third house. And so, um, it's sometimes it's difficult to differentiate, like, is it siblings? Is it short trips? Is it communication? Is it, short trips can be like short trips as in like articles versus like book length manuscripts, right? In the ninth house being publishing and stuff like that. Um, so it's a wonderful way to gain experience with the book of life as your teacher. Because ultimately, although I I have learned much from many incredible astrologers that I'm all all very appreciative of. I never had, one teacher, one guru that I sort of um, learned from in a real formal way. I was just self-taught, and most of that teaching was from the book of life, is what I like to call it, just watching and learning and living this stuff. And it's like walking the zodiac, if you will, walking the planets, walking with them, traveling with them. Um, when I was in Spain this summer, Adam was there, my buddy Adam Gainsbourg, and he was telling people about the word sonatos, where we get sonatic cycle from. It means to travel with, to walk with. And so yeah, in that sense, I want to share a little bit with you of my journey. Um, Recently, I published this article on Substack that I was telling you about, and I'll just make a little quote from it. Well, let's see. First of all, I want to share with you like how to put this Aries um, full moon in context. And so let's have a look at the full moon chart itself. Here we go. So the actual full moon happens right about sunrise on the East Coast um, on Thursday, October 17th. And it's conjunct Chiron in Aries. Um, and so right away, the archetype of Chiron is asking to be talked about. Um, Chiron's a really interesting archetype. Um, Even though I started out as a modern psychological astrologer and all of my formal education is in counseling and psychology, um, for many years I was really diving deep into the classical and traditional ways of doing, and so I didn't really bother all that much, even with the outer planets, much less but I used to love messing around with the asteroids and stuff, and I've been reintegrating the asteroids back into my practice um, in the last several years, so I started out kind of modern psychological, then I got really hardcore classical and, astrological magic and stuff. And I've been working on like integrating the two more, like bringing the asteroids into my magical elections and various things. And one of the reasons why I've been doing this is when Chiron went into Aries the last time, and I'll go back to that chart in 2018, right before Chiron went into Aries, I had a dream, and it was a really, really intense dream. Um, I don't know that the contents matter, except that there was this huge key in the dream. And I mean, the key was like half the size of a person. So it really stood out. And it was kind of unmistakably calling my attention to the Chiron archetype. And so I did a lot of journaling about that. I was working with my colleague, Jungian colleague, Shireen Shostak at the time, fortunately. And so I had she does these wonderful 40-day intensives where um, she gives people journaling ideas and stuff and gives them a sacred container to do exactly this kind of work. Um, and so, yeah, it made me remember like, oh, wow, there's these other bodies, there's these, and then of course that brought up the asteroids and stuff again. So I've been reintegrating this stuff back into my practice, and yeah, what's really interesting is that it occurred to me, well, I've always been sort of dissatisfied with the generic term wounded healer to describe Chiron because, I mean, you know, I've, yeah, I'm a straight white, male, and got advantages that come with that or whatever. But, my life has not exactly been a walk in the park. And I've had plenty of, wounding experiences or whatever, but I've never wanted to come from a place of identifying with those wounds, those wounds or those difficult experiences. Yeah, the older I get and the more experience I get, yeah, I'm happier to own those. Yes, they are a part of me, but do I want to like build my identity around them? No, I think that if anything, it's the reverse. Like my identity as an astrologer, for instance, comes from a dream that I had um that and I believe the dream came from this quest that I undertook as a way of overcoming the wounding and the obstacles and the limitations that I had experienced as a young man and a child. And so, yeah, it doesn't feel satisfying for me. Wounded healer. I mean, yes, of course he was wounded. Yes, of course he was a healer, a great healer. Maybe even the original healer, right? Um, but it just seems to me like it's a way of it's a heuristic. And heuristics are fine. We need heuristics. They're shortcuts that allow us to deal with when there's too much information, and we can just say, so in the context of like, I don't know, an entire chart reading or something, like talking about the wounded healer might be enough. But I think the opposite is also true. Like it's not enough to simply say wounded healer and leave it at that. And so one of the things that occurred to, me is like when I think of Chiron, he's a great teacher, and this is what I was talking about in the Substack article, and I'll pull up a quote for y'all. Um, so notably, as important to Chiron's mythology as healing were his contributions as a teacher and mentor, like his foster father, the sun god Apollo, before him. And as it often goes in life with both children and students, each of Chiron's students excelled in and exemplified one or two of his traits over the others. Achilles was the greatest warrior ever known, but he still knew how to tend to the wounds of his soldiers. Aristeas became the god of rustic arts such as beekeeping and cheesemaking. Asclepius became a renowned healer, so renowned that he had to be made a god in order to stop a quarrel with Hades, who felt he was robbing his kingdom of citizens. Asclepius was said to even be able to heal the dead, in which case Pluto wasn't getting his just due of souls, so Zeus had to make him immortal. And Jason became the greatest explorer ever known, gathering a group of heroes around him and sailing to the ends of the earth to retrieve the Golden Fleece. So, I think this says as much about, there's a quote in the Bible that I love where Jesus is advising people regarding false prophets. And Jesus says, judge them by their fruits. A good tree does not bear evil fruits, and an evil tree cannot bear good fruits. And so, and with most people, it's a mixed bag, right? They're not totally good, they're not totally bad. But with Chiron, I mean, look at this. I mean, he had some amazing students who went on to do some amazing things. And so if we judge him by his fruits, then these are things that we could focus on as much as the wounding, um, you know? And so along that line of thinking, the next quote is, yeah, in my journey of like reintegrating the asteroids and stuff. I mean, I'll never forget the time that Demetra, I think it was when she and I were on the steering committee together. We were of an astrological organization, and I asked her to do one of her asteroid readings for me, and like to see, like she has this way of like these certain groups of asteroids that are grouped by theme, like mythology and so forth, and she'll put them on the chart and see which ones are in powerful places. And I've always been reminded of that. And so I have like over here on my desk, I have a little piece of paper with like love asteroids, wealth asteroids, like whatever themes. And I'll go ahead and plug those in when I'm looking at a chart according to a particular theme. And then so I realize, holy crap, all of these mythological figures have asteroids named after them. 588 Achilles, 2135 Aristeas, 4581 Asclepius, 6063 Jason, and even Chiron's adoptive parents, Apollo and Artemis, 1862 Apollo, 105 Artemis. And then let's not forget Jason's wife, Medea, which we'll be talking about quite a bit later. I want to say, what is her number? It's in the 300s. I've got it. Let's see. Medea is, no, actually 212 Medea. I'll be sure to write that down. So yeah, imagine this, like there's all these astrological indicators to show us this more granular focus of like, okay, which Chiron are we talking about? If we're talking about the teacher, then maybe these individual students can even dial that in a little more specifically for us and be like, yeah, it's the teacher of Jason actually that ends up showing up in this particular lunation. And that's because and so here's the to finish the quote. Given that we have these additional indicators available to us, why should we continue to simplistically refer to Chiron as the wounded healer and leave it at that? I propose that rather, when Chiron is a focal point in any chart, then by adding in these asteroids, we can begin to understand better what particular facets of Chiron's complex nature are being called forth for a particular person and or for a particular moment. So it's a way of just dialing in and getting more granularity and getting more specificity about what part of the Chiron mythos and the Chiron um, consciousness stream, if you will, what part of that are we talking about? Um, and what's wild about that is that if we go back and we look at, there's been three really important mundane charts that have Chiron as a focus. Of course, Chiron's ingress to Aries. And when we draw that chart up for April 17th, 2018, there's Jason. The asteroid Jason is exactly conjunct the ascendant in that chart. You can't, there's no way that that asteroid can stand out anymore. I myself have that placement. I have Jason conjunct my ascendant. And like I said, for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to go on this quest when I was younger to get out of the situation that I was in. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, why Jason went on the quest. But let's just notice that, okay, so there's this Chiron ingress, Jason's on the ascendant. There's this eclipse that happened earlier this year, on April 8th, 2024. Chiron is exactly minute and degree conjunct the eclipse. And Jason this time is on the descendant. So again, angular, also sextile to the eclipse. And finally, the full moon where we are now, Jason is at the Coeli and square the eclipse. So this asteroid Jason and this mythological complex, if you will, archetypal complex, if you will, of Chiron as the teacher of Jason in particular, seems to be calling out to be understood better. And so yeah, that's kind of what prompted me to really take, and now this, and so we're going to go into storytelling mode here because it's a really rich, complex story. Very tragic, very typically Greek in that way. The ending is horribly tragic, but the Greeks love their tragedy for whatever reason. I mean, you could see it as a product of Stoicism, I guess. But so let's go back to the beginning, which is actually, if we think about Jason, the beginning for him is that he was the heir to the kingdom of Iolcus, I guess is how you say it. And he was usurped by his wicked uncle, who got his father out of the way and took the power. So, and I first became aware of this connection in the book Astrology of Fate by Liz Green. It was published in the 1980s. And she goes on at length about how that this is a very central myth of, because the sun is exalted in Aries, right? So kingship, generally speaking, is thought about in Leo. But this idea of sovereignty, spiritual sovereignty, she sees this myth of Jason and the terrible father as being a really central theme. And I mean, with Sun conjunct Aries, Sun in Aries conjunct Saturn, sorry, in my chart, and Jason on the ascendant. I mean, I can totally relate. That was one of the first books where I was like, wow, she gets it, like, yeah, this is kind of what I'm going through, this terrible father routine. Um, but to understand, and so Jason didn't just go looking for the Golden Fleece because he like wanted to be a hero and wanted to go on an adventure. He went on, it was a necessity that took him on that quest because um as fate would have it, um Hera was sort of disguising herself as an old woman crossing a stream, and Jason helped her across the stream, and in the process lost one of his sandals. And this is interesting because there was a prophecy that the guy who would, these, typical of like whether Uranus or Saturn or Jupiter or this wicked uncle, like they know that they've been, greedily holding on to power, and they know that that means, you know, that reverse energy is coming for them, and so they're always like, okay, like, how is this, who's going to try to steal my power? And the oracle said that beware of a man with one sandal. Okay, and so Jason loses his sandal, and he's fully aware of the prophecy. So he comes into town and he says, "Hey, Unc, check it out, one sandal, I'm here for you." And um, And uncle says, "Well, yeah, okay, I'm happy to give you your kingship, but with one condition. I'll trade you for the Golden Fleece." And so Jason, has to go on this. I mean, he's only got one sandal. What's he going to do? Go to war? He's got no army, so he's off to get the Golden Fleece. Now, this requires sort of like in a movie, this would be like where they like flip back in time to like, because what is the Golden Fleece? Well, the Golden Fleece is the fleece of the chrysomalis, which is this magical ram that Hermes created. Hermes, who is, by the way, the great grandfather of Jason on his mother's side. Um, So Hermes creates this golden ram to rescue the children, uh, Phrixus and Hele, from their wicked stepmother. And this is really interesting to me because this is actually what I'm writing about right now, in my second book, where I'm talking about the mythology of Hermes and dividing it into six archetypes, six faces of Hermes, if you will, to go with the six solar phases of Mercury. And, everybody's familiar with the trickster, everybody's familiar with the messenger. But this theme of Hermes coming to the rescue of young children is very prevalent. There's many times where Hermes shows up to like take the child and secretly carry it away to safety, And in this case, he uh or like he got a hold of Heracles and brought it to be nursed by Hera, which is where the name comes from, and that's how Heracles became godlike or semi more like a demigod or whatever, because he nursed from Hera. um but yeah, so this is a particular facet of the Hermes mythos that is very much underappreciated, I think, as the guardian or protector of children and young men even. I mean, you can extend this out to maybe um, Perseus even. But in particular, there's a whole bunch of children that Hermes is protective over. So unfortunately the girl falls from the ram, and so that's Hell's Pont is where she fell. um but the boy makes it, and when the ram arrives, it's sacrificed and put in a sacred grove in the grove sacred to Mars, right? And so it's at the end of the earth in this sacred grove, and it's kind of like it's similar to what happens when beings, these beings are made immortal and they're put up in the stars. It's just like one step removed from that. It's at the ends of the earth and it's guarded by this dragon and these and stuff. So Jason now has a seemingly impossible task to go retrieve the Golden Fleece. So what does he do? He says, yeah, like the reason why I couldn't fight my uncle is I got no army and I got to go on this quest. I better gather some friends around me. And so, and by the way, I mean this is like straight out of Joseph Campbell's, hero's journey. Um, yeah, what's the first thing you do is you get a team, you get help. You bring together, you find some magical instruments that are gonna, you pack your bags like the fool is carrying that bag on it. That's his bag of tricks that he's got to get him through the journey, and so he gathers this crew of Argonauts around him and they sail to the ends of the earth and they make it. They over many obstacles and many and this is where the story gets really interesting because so and this is where it really mirrors this idea of the hero's journey, or the monomyth is what Campbell called it. I think the hero's journey is a filter that other people have put on it afterwards. Um, but there's this departure and then there's this return. So getting there um to the fleece was only half the journey. And when Jason gets there, it's well not guarded, but it's in possession of another king. And so he goes to this king and says, hey, by the way, I'm here to get the Golden Fleece, and tells him why. And he says, yeah, okay. Um, you can have it if you can complete these three tasks. And the tasks are to plow this field with these iron-hoofed, fire-breathing bulls. So he has to like tame these actually supernatural beasts. It'd be one thing if they were just like wild bulls or something, right? But they're actually like fire-breathing iron hoofs. And so he has to plow the field. Then he has to sow the field with dragon teeth. And then he has to get past the dragon that never sleeps, which is guarding this tree. Um, which, by the way, Draco, like the constellation of the dragon, it's circumpolar, so it never sets, so it never sleeps. There's a very clear like constellational starry reference here. And so Jason's like, man, like I made it all this way only to find out like this impossible task. And so of course there's a little twist of fate here. And this is interesting because this is, Hera is often cast as this like jealous, vengeful figure for whatever reason. You can attribute whatever motivations you want to that, but in this case, she's helpful. She convinces Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to make the king's daughter, Medea, fall in love with Jason. And you think, oh, okay, so instead of completing these tasks, he's just going to marry the king's daughter, and then the king will be glad to give him the thing. Nope, not exactly. What happens is, it turns out Medea is a bit of a witch. She's a sorceress. She's um, skilled in magical arts. And she agrees to help Jason if he will agree to marry her. And so she gives him this ointment made of herbs. It's a little bit different depending on the source. The tale gets repeated different times in different ways, but it's either an ointment or it's like a herbal potion of some kind. Um, I think in I'm trying to remember which source I read. It sounded almost like that it was more like a potion that he had drunk in one of them. Um, but in any case, it protects him from the fire of the bulls. So he manages to yoke them up and plows the field. And everybody's like, oh my God, wow. And then she tells him, hey, look, when you put those dragon teeth in the ground, they're going to turn into a bunch of zombie soldiers. And what you want to do is distract them, throw something in the middle of them, and they'll all start fighting each other. And then you won't have to fight them. So that's what he does, and it works. And then finally, she gives him a potion to put the dragon to sleep. And this is really interesting because, you know, being schooled by Chiron, you would think maybe he would know some of this stuff, but again, it's like each one of Chiron's students seemed to like have a particular specialty, right? Jason was just this intrepid explorer, like the pioneer aspect of Aries. Um, and but yet you still see Chiron's presence in that it took knowledge of which Chiron is a teacher in the form of Medea to get him where he really needed to go. Um, and this is where the story begins to turn really tragic, and it's like it's very realistic actually because so I mean, you know, it would be great. And one version of the story I read is kind of like, oh yeah, he gets the fleece and they live happily after. They don't say live happily ever after, but that's kind of the end. Um, but you know, in the play, Medea, and in other versions, you know, it gets pretty dark after this. Um, Before I go there, I guess I just want to say, like, for me, this myth seems to be like really symbolic of what's modern, you know, uh, terminology called Heros Gamos, the sacred marriage, right? So there's this masculine hero that goes out like this. There's this outward yang movement of, you know, seeking and searching, right? And then, but when he gets there, it takes this inward feminine wisdom of like, you know, the stuff that she would have been calling on would have been like, you know, it would have been pagan even to the you know, the Olympian religion of the time. The kind of stuff that she was calling on would have been pagan even in that time. You know, it's more like primordial knowledge of like herbs and earth chthonic powers and so on, you know. And so it takes this sort of feminine um, wisdom, you know, that to complete the task. Um, and so you have the sacred marriage of the two that enables access to the Golden Fleece, which basically represents the higher self. So if we want to interpret this like in modern psychological terms, it's really simple. Like you have to integrate the two parts of yourself in order to reach your higher self, you know, in order to become an actualized person. You can't just be this yang hero and expect that that's going to get you everything. It's only half of the equation. You have to have the you know, and the other thing is, of course, Medea was calling him to be a family man. She wants to get married. She wants to, which means then you become integrated in the community. So there's this family communal aspect, but there's also this feminine intuitive knowing of like these, you know, folk arts, you know, that is more um earth and water, whereas Jason was more on the fire air path of, you know. And so it's only when you have both of these energies integrated in you that you have access to the higher self and you can reach actualization. um And that's, I guess, why Chiron as a teacher to me is so much more of who he is, because when you think about, like, in terms of modern psychology, Maslow's hierarchy talks about that there's levels of needs, like, the basic one is we need food and water and shelter, and without those it's hard to even have relationships, and we need relationships in order to really be um able to access our higher aspects of ourselves. We need love and esteem of colleagues and so on. And then we begin to be actualized. But um, even though Maslow went in search of, like, what makes people actualized, what he realized is that's not being actualized. Becoming in touch with your higher self is not the end of the journey. It's helping other people actualize. That's the highest thing that a human can do. And so that's why Chiron as a teacher and mentor, I think, is he represents, like, the highest um sort of human uh the highest human endeavor of being someone who can help others act, because how else does humanity become actualized but through actualized people helping others to actualize, right? So Chiron is actually like a catalyst for the actualization of the collective, right? um and so, yeah, the story turns tragic here because now, presumably now, Jason is a powerful man. He's going to be a king in his own right. So all the politics start, right? And everybody says, "Oh, look, Jason, you know, yeah, Medea's great. She helped you with a thing. Like, we don't have anything against her per se, but, like, this witch thing, that's just not socially acceptable. You need to kind of, maybe you could put her over there in a nice country home and stuff, and you could go see her. Nobody wants you to get rid of her, but we want you to have somebody, we want you to marry somebody a little more socially respectable that we can, you can bring to dinner parties and stuff, and nobody's going to be worried about getting turned into a toad or whatever." I mean, you can just imagine, right, what the conversation would be like. And the tragic part is that Jason falls for it. Um and not just that, but he even tries to convince Medea, look, you're look, you're still marginalized, being who you are, like, and this is good for you too. Like, you'll be taken care of. I'll be able to take care of you, and you're always going to be like, people are going to be not trust you and be like, it's going to be difficult to be who you are, and you'll be better off being able to just be um you know like, off on your own, doing your thing, and not, having to do these political battles all the time. And, he convinced himself that it was true. And the thing is, I guess from Medea's perspective, she was in love. She just wanted to be with the man she loved. And, this idea of, like, him, you know, taking care of her from afar or whatever was not appealing. And so in the play, she ends up murdering his children, and it's a really tragic ending. And Jason ends up, like, I think he ends up, like, poor and alone and dying. He's, like, in his ship, the Argo, and a beam falls on his head and kills him. It's like the whole thing just turns to crap. And I think this story is reflective of what happens when we fall for the trap that that getting to the Golden Fleece, or even getting it, is the complete journey. Like, um it's almost like, achieving enlightenment is like, that's like the end of the journey. Well, it's not. I mean, we grow in consciousness in stages, and each growth in consciousness brings us more um ability to live ourselves more fully, but we still have to live, it's not over until till you get called home, you know what I'm saying? And so you still have to live. And so there's the second part of the journey of returning, is really the hard part, because you have to be able to bring back these gifts from beyond that the hero finds, off boon, elixir, whatever your special gift that you want to bring to the collective. It's just like with Medea, like, yeah, if it takes magic to get this thing, that you people are going to say, oh, maybe I don't, maybe I, yeah, oh, that's really beautiful, but I got to cook dinner. My kids got homework. They don't want nothing to do with it. You know what I'm saying? Because it's scary. They might get called off on an adventure. It might, their life might have to be changed if they accept some of this magic that you got, which is, it's kind of like, so it's almost like you've got to learn how to trick people into, not trick, but market them, you got to, the marketing campaign of like, wow, of like getting people to accept this wonderful boon or elixir, without being scared of it or whatever. That's like the second half of the battle. Um, and that's really the hard part in my estimation. I mean, I've this technique, for instance, I mean, I don't know if anything will ever become of it, but for me, it was really interesting. And who knows, maybe I'll collect, a series of essays on Chiron and put it into a book later. I don't know. But, um, I've had, having new ideas is not a problem for me. It's like finding ways to, um, get those ideas integrated into what's already being, done, and getting other people to realize the value in using those ideas, and how do they apply those ideas within what they already know, and integrating it back, that second part of the journey. That's the really difficult part in my experience. So yeah, with all that said, if we want to take another look at this full moon chart. So I put in all the asteroids from the story we were just relating, and notably the full moon itself is conjunct Chiron. Chiron, I think it might actually be pronounced more properly Chiron. And Juno, Hera, is conjunct the sun like really closely. And so it's interesting how she played a part in that myth. And then Jason is over here square to the full moon. And then Medea is here in early Sagittarius. Um, and then Aphrodite is here with the north node of the moon in Aries. And so it might be interesting to maybe even throw all of this stuff in your chart and see like what's going on. I mean, um, one of the things that this reminds me of, just like generally speaking, is like the concept of like honoring our contracts, like, I mean, Hera is the goddess of marriage, but really, what is marriage? But it's a social contract. Um, and so honoring your contracts, I mean, that's the reason why Jason, became a tragic figure, is because he didn't honor his contract. He tried to, renegotiate it or whatever, and didn't, what did not was not successful in that. Um, it's interesting too, like I've been rereading the Homeric hymns, and in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, it's interesting because there's only three of the gods and goddess, well, there three, none of the gods, and only three of the goddesses were kind of immune to the influence of Aphrodite, who was constantly trying to like basically I mean, to me, it seems almost like a trickster figure. She would get them to fall in love with mortals and then kind of joke on them, ah ha ha, you had sex with a monkey, like, or something like that. And and then it happened to her where she ended up falling in love with this man. And so she did, and she literally says in the hymn, yeah, now I don't have the ability to joke on the rest of them anymore. Um, but it was Athena, Artemis, and Hestia who were the only ones who were immune to this power of attraction that Aphrodite represents. And so and it's interesting, recently I was a part of Astromagia conference again for the second year, and one of my colleagues there, Kristen Mathis, talks about Aphrodite as like in Orphism as this like original principle of unity, of the connection of all things. And so if we think of Aphrodite in those terms as just like the primordial lust for life that all beings share, like this joy um and passion for life that Aries usually represents, really innocently and purely in a lot of ways. I think that's kind of what, and that's how. So you combine that, Aphrodite is just like um, this pure sort of joy, joie de vivre, and but then you combine it with Aphrodite of like this goddess of sacred contracts. Okay, so it's like, okay, you take this energy that's just like really powerful, um, attractive force, but then you combine it with this sacred contract energy, and it's like, okay, like the power of Eros to move the world and to move people um encounters this like, okay, like, it would be nice if I guess we could all get along or whatever, but there's always like these agreements, and there's spoken agreements and unspoken agreements. And so when people get together, there's this sort of primal force that's bringing them together, but then it's in the coming together, there's sort of these agreements that happen. And um and but usually we're so powerfully attracted and so caught up in just the power of this eros force that brings us together that we aren't necessarily paying full attention to the agreements. And so some of the agreements are unconscious. We think the other person is agreeing to something, but we've never actually, formally said, hey, I really want this. And are you willing to sign on to that too before, and so we end up in these situations where these unspoken agreements then get broken and stuff like that, and that's kind of like where the tragedy happens, um, like for instance, Jason agrees to marry Medea, but you know, then later he tries to renege on that, and it's like, yeah, maybe you guys needed to spend a little more time talking out what being married looks like, um, or something like that, So there's like, it's just like this caution of like, yes, you need to allow the primal force of attraction, eros, to move you because that's what moves the world. I mean, there was only three goddesses that were immune to it, um, and it's beautiful and lovely, and it takes us places we would never be able to go otherwise. Um, but then where that intersects with another being, with another person, like there's this need to, okay, let's go ahead and like talk this out and figure out, okay, where does your eros meet my eros, and how are we going to navigate that agreement of formally coming together, um and then yeah, and then there's so that it's not so that there aren't as many surprises, you know. I mean, I've heard people talk about, you know, um when you're doing relationship counseling or whatever, you can divide things into three baskets. You know, there's the deal breakers, like, okay, here's my deal breakers. You know, those are usually if you've got deal breakers where like there is absolutely no way I'm going to tolerate X, Y, or Z. Um, it's good to that the other person know about those, right? And then you've got the things where, yeah, I'm willing to give and take a little bit on these things, and then you've got the basket where, yeah, whatever, you know. And so, at the very least, it's really good for each party to be clear about what the deal breakers are. Um, and then, you don't end up with the sort of the tragic outcomes. Oh yeah, there's a lot more we could talk about, obviously, but it's probably enough for now. I hope you enjoyed this sort of rabbit hole dive into the students of Chiron and the asteroids that are symbolized in this myth of Jason, and this exploration of the hero's journey from sort of like an every man or every woman's point of view. Um, yeah, it would be interesting to hear feedback from people of what their experience is of sticking these asteroids in the chart, and oh wow, this story, or and none of these come up, but Aristeas did, and I happen to be like a cunning person who's folk arts or my thing or whatever. You know, it would be great to hear feedback like that if people have it. um, don't forget to stop by my website and sign up for my newsletter. I had a bunch of signups after the last podcast, and that's awesome. I just sent out a newsletter there's a link to my Substack that I just started, and I gave people a free report of Chiron that I wrote back in 2018 when I had that dream. Um, yeah, so the other thing is, if anybody's interested in having a reading done by a professional from this standpoint of putting these other asteroids and stuff, you can contact me. Also, I'm doing a special for people on those. If you contact me by the end of the month, new customers can book at the return customer rate, which is a savings of about $75. So that's pretty cool. And if I hear people all the time, I've wanted to get a reading from you for a long time, and I'm happy that we're finally doing this. If you're one of those people, know this, my rates will be going up at the end of the year. Inflation just keeps happening. And, I look around, I see people who've got like way less experience than me charging more. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not good. So I try to keep myself, at sort of a, working man's, every man's sort of situation. But yeah, it's time for the rates to go up. And so if you have been thinking about booking now before the end of the year, you're going to save some money for sure. And this is an opportunity for people to get a special reading. I'm going to do a special next month on my Mercury readings. We'll be talking about the Mercury elemental year of fire when Mercury gets into Sagittarius for that extended stay. And so I'll be doing another special on those. If you're interested in one of those, be on the lookout for my newsletter and stuff, and my Substack for those opportunities. One last thing about the Substack. Um, there's an option to pledge your support. So right now, everything on Substack, everything on my Substack is free. But eventually I'm going to be going paid. And when that happens, there'll be some free articles will still happen, but some of them will be only for paid subscribers. So if you want to pledge your support, and make that happen, then you can pledge monthly, yearly, or you can pledge as a founder. And for anybody who's willing to pledge as a founder, I'll go ahead and do one of these Chiron-centered readings that I outlined this new technique for. I'll go ahead and do one of those for you, complimentary, gratis, um, just for pledging, and you won't even be charged until I get enough pledges then and turn on the paid um, the paid app or whatever. Stripe, I think is what it is. Um, so yeah, so that's another opportunity for people to get involved. And yeah, I guess I'll see y'all next month. We'll be talking about the Mercury elemental year again. Woohoo! All right. Thanks again for being here and see you soon. Bye for now.